because me and you have talked about this before. What women don't understand about men is a man, if he's content with you, right? It's kind of like, it's not my favorite ice cream, but it's good enough.
Pick back up on this because it seems like we got so much to talk about.
Traditionally untraditional, take 3.
Right. Welcome to another episode of Traditionally Untraditional. And today we are talking about boundaries. Today's episode is the boundaries dilemma. Where do you draw the line? What happens when boundaries in relationships become walls, or when there are no boundaries at all? Today, we're diving into one of the most controversial, emotionally charged topics in relationships, and that's boundaries. And trust me, some of you might not like what we uncover. So we need to define boundaries. This is a hot topic, not necessarily just in relationships, but across our generation. Our generation is really heavy on the boundaries thing right now. We talk about protecting our peace. You hear that a lot, especially in the space of mental health, because mental health is being talked about a lot. And we don't often place mental health and marriage together. But if you're married, you're with that person most of the time, most of your life, right? And so you have to imagine that your marriage partner has an impact on your mental health. And so when you're talking about that, we've now added in boundaries to relationships. And boundaries is controversial because some people believe that when you have a partner, not that I don't think we ever vocalize there should be no boundaries, but we do believe that we should have free access, and whatever that means, to that person, because they're our person. And if that person comes and says, hey, these are my boundaries, people may feel some type of way about that. And they're good boundaries, they're bad boundaries. And so we just want to talk about that today. The book we're primarily pulling from today is Boundaries in Marriage by Dr. John Townsend. And one of the insights from his book, he says, a boundary isn't a punishment. It's a definition of where you end and your partner begins. So, with that being said, I want to kind of turn it over to you to talk more about boundaries. This was a book that you brought to me. We read together. It also comes with a workbook. We found it very insightful, probably as insightful as the road less traveled. Probably a lot of aha moments and how we think about boundaries and how we process and what those boundaries kind of mean. And in this book, he also talks about unhealthy boundaries and where those issues can lie if you're setting too many boundaries. So, turn it over to you.
I think that it was good that you opened up with mental health, actually, and preserving your peace. Because I think a lot of times the first thing is we make a mistake with boundaries. We think that we are setting a boundary for somebody else, right? You can't say this. You can't do this. But boundaries are about what you just said, preserving your peace for your own mental health, right? Just a quick note, my background being a nurse, that there is a thin line between health, good health, and not good health, right? So when it comes to like your mental health, there's a fine line between being mentally well and not being mentally well, to the point where a lot of us are actually what's called functioning mentally ill. And essentially what that's saying is most of us are actually can hold a job. We can be in a relationship. We have children. We can, for the most part, function in society, right? We can follow the rules of the road. For the most part, we can function in society. But behind closed doors, you start to see that there's a little bit of imbalance there, right? When you start to get more detail about our relationships, our thoughts, our choices, decisions, you can see there that there's definitely some unhealthy habits or practices or whatever. And most of us are what you would say, or I would say a lot of people are in that range where you're not so mentally unwell that you can't keep a job,
Mm-hmm.
or that you're homeless, right? A lot of times we see the worst of mental illness in the homeless, where you literally see people standing outside, whether it be 100 degrees and they got on a fur coat, or whether it be, 0 degrees and they got on flip-flops and shorts and, a blank stare and talking to themselves, right? We can clearly see that it's mental illness, but we don't recognize it. But most people fall in the category of functioning mentally
Mm-hmm.
ill.
So you're saying most of us are functionally crazy.
To a degree, yes, to a
Mm-hmm.
degree. And it's a very thin line actually between being mentally well and being functionally mentally ill. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So with that being the case, essentially boundaries, I like how the book puts it, it's not a punishment, but it's a definition of where you end and where your partner begins. And I think that that's a good thing to recognize, that you are an individual and so is your partner, right? Where your partner begins. What is your partner's boundaries, right? I think it's a recognition of there's not a blurred line between us. Like we are, I don't even know of an example of that, but like, how tie-dye can bleed together, right? And you start to lose like the defining
Mm-hmm.
lines of who's who and what. But I think when you understand boundaries, you keep a, not a dividing line, but a border of who you are, your values,
Mm-hmm.
and your partner does the same. And I think when you do that, you can acknowledge but also respect your autonomy as a human being. And you expect your partner to respect that, but then you also reciprocate that. When I'm looking at you, I recognize that yes, you are my husband, but you are an autonomous being. You have values, you have a border that makes you you, that makes you whole. And we have to work together to just like that tie dye to flow together, but we still have border that defines me, where you start in the opposite way, right? What defines you, and then where I start from there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I think that we need to keep in mind that when you met that person, who they were is why you were attracted to them. And we try to dissolve that, maybe intentionally, maybe unintentionally. Most times I think it's unintentional, like you said. But in order for that person, in order for you to be happy, so twofold, I'm talking about that person. The partner needs to understand that that person needs to be their own person.
Mm-hmm.
But you, as the spouse or partner, you want them to be their own person because that's who you was attracted to,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's why they are who they are. And we get with that person and we start trying to control, if you will. And um, a word, ownership. A lot of times we talk about marriage. I think that some people flat out say it, but you don't own that person. You don't own your wife. You don't own your husband. You are two mutually exclusive adults who have agreed to share a life experience together.
Mm-hmm.
That's it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you're not looking at it like that, then you're not truly in a partnership and you don't have appropriate boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes back to what we said before about having a friend that was previously married and they got a divorce and they realized they have been eating something quite often that they didn't even like. And then once they got a divorce, they said, I don't even like this. And it's not to say that you shouldn't try new things, but it's also okay for your partner to have a preference that maybe is not your preference.
Mm-hmm.
And that is perfectly okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, I really like where we're going with this, because I hope those the people viewing or listening are understanding that boundaries are for you to maintain your wholeness.
Yes.
And when you're in a relationship with someone long term committed, it is important that each person maintains their wholeness, or what I like to call your whole life, right? Um, and we didn't reference this book, but it came to mind. I'm gonna think of it. The book is called "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway." It's about by Susan Jeffers. But I love that book because there's a section in there called Your Whole Life. And essentially, what she talks about is, overcoming depression, overcoming being, having a victim mindset set to taking, control and taking action in your life, being purposeful and intentional. But one of the things she talks about in that chapter is how whole is your whole life, I think is what the chapter is called. But she says that a lot of times our what we value or what we put so much importance on in life, right, is very small. And it can lead to depression when we don't have that said thing. And so she takes you through some exercises. And for example, like the box, right? So let's imagine having a sheet of paper and putting one box there, right? And this is your life. This is what's important to you. This is what drives you, right? If you would just have this thing. And for a lot of people, it's relationship, right? So let's say the relationship is going good. Great. My life is great. And then let's say the relationship is not. You're no longer in that relationship. You lose that relationship, right? And she says, so now you have a paper with a box and it's empty.
Mm.
Depression sets in, doubt sets in, all kinds of negative feelings and emotions. She said, that's a problem because you weren't a whole person to begin with, because you put so much into that you didn't put enough into making yourself whole. And so she does another exercise, and essentially now take a sheet of paper and do 9 boxes, right? Put in there, career, hobby, religion, um traveling, all the things, family, children, right? Relationship in one of those boxes. Ultimately, her point is, when you look at now your whole life, what makes you up as an individual, what you value, what makes you happy, right? It basically shows you that even without that relationship box, let's say that that's empty, 8 of your other boxes are full.
Hmm.
Does that make sense where I'm going with
Yeah,
that?
and I want to add to your point. I didn't cut
Go
you off.
ahead. Go ahead.
Add to your point. I think that most people who are unhappy in relationships are really unhappy with themselves, unhappy with their own life.
Mm-hmm.
And I was watching TikTok today where this guy was talking about midlife crisis. And if you don't like the word midlife, you can say existential crisis. And one of the things that made me think about is, to your point about these boxes, the reason why midlife crisis happened is because we go through life, and he says, for the most part, the beginning part of your life, for the most part, for some people, for most people, I would say, is kind of planned out. He said you have elementary school. He said, and you know that after elementary school, you go to middle school. And you know that after middle school, you go to college. And you know that after college, you get a job. Then you know that once you get a job, you get a family. And then you have children. And he said, you hit a point where all of those things have been done, these checkbox. And you look in the mirror or your life, who am I? Is this who I want to be? Where am I in life? And that comes from not paying attention to those other boxes. And the reality is we probably had those boxes at some point in time, but the way life goes is we abandon those boxes.
Mm-hmm.
We abandon it for the relationship, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Before you got into this relationship, you were working out, you were going to this organization, you had these hobbies, you had these things, and then you get into this relationship, and then you focus all of your attention there. And this is what happens in marriage. This is what happens, and I think that it happens to both men and women. It just looks a little different.
Okay.
So women, we see all the time on social media women complaining, and it's the big thing, right? Women hit a certain age, they want a divorce, they're unhappy with their husband, yada yada yada. But a big part of it, when you scrape past all the issues, is they're unfulfilled in their life. I've been raising these kids. I've been doing all this housework. I've been doing this for the husband.
The common phrase that you'll hear women say is, I lost myself in the relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And crazy enough, men feel the same way. When you talk to men, they talk about all this stuff I've been doing has been for the family. Because for men, even if I'm making the money, I'm bringing home the bread, you know, my money may not be going to the things I want to buy. I may want a motorcycle. I may want this. And some people are buying it. But if you don't have the money to do both things, if you are being a responsible man as you should be, your money goes to your children. Your money goes to the house. Your money goes to, and I'm not saying that women's money don't go there, but I think that it's more acceptable. When you think of a shopping spree, do you think of men or women? When you think of shopaholics, when you think of, it's more acceptable. Retail therapy, men and women. Men like to buy stuff. I would love a retail therapy day. I'm not going out to buy clothes, but if I had the money, I would come back with a lot of gadgets to heal the, right? But you don't do that. And so men, they get up that age and they look around. Who am I? And then it looks crazy to everybody. He's a 40-year-old man. Why is he just getting a motorcycle? Because he always wanted a motorcycle. It's a 40-year-old man. Why is he doing that? Because he always wanted to do that. But he's pushed those things off. And a lot of times with the idea of nobility, and I'm pretty sure women do the same thing. This is what it means to be a mother. This is what it means to be a father. This is what it means to be a man. This is what it means to be a woman. And we neglect ourselves. And then all of a sudden we look up and we're unhappy. And because we live with this person and we can't blame it, the negative energy gets directed to the person that's there. And who's there? Your spouse.
Your spouse. But at the end of the day, really in truth, the disappointment is coming from within because you don't feel fulfilled. And it goes back to other podcasts that we've had where we talk about fulfillment comes from within.
Yes.
Your partner cannot fulfill your purpose. So I love where this conversation is going because when we initially started, I wasn't thinking about Susan Jeffers and, your whole life, but that's essentially what boundaries are. And it even goes back into, now our podcast is traditionally untraditional, right? We believe that the ultimate goal is marriage, but we believe in long-term committed relationships, even if they don't end up in marriage, right? But going back to another podcast, when you are intentional with dating and looking for that long-term partner, if your boxes are full, you're a whole person, you're looking for somebody who kind of complements your boxes. You get what I'm saying? So a lot of times, even we get into these relationships, that's part of the not being intentional about it. You haven't really sat down and plotted out, who am I as a whole person? My hobbies, my likes, my dislikes, things like that. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
And being intentional about keeping those things as best as possible. Life happens, but keeping those things that make you happy, that make you going.
Right. And that's something that you have to, when you enter into a relationship, you have to communicate. A lot of times we compromise and we don't know what we should be compromising. So in this book with Boundaries in Marriage by Dr. John Townsend, and there's also a book too, if you're not married, Boundaries in Dating, same author. But what he defines is, when it comes to compromise, when you are in relationship, period, and relationship could be working relationship, any relationship that involves you and another person, there's always going to be compromise. When you're at work with your fellow employees, with your boss, if you're going to the drive-through, getting food, it doesn't matter. Every interaction between multiple people, there's going to have to be a compromise. Otherwise, it end up like you talked about, we're always fighting, right? So when you understand that, when you're talking about a relationship, long-term commitment, what do you compromise? People end up compromising values. And people don't know the difference between a value versus a preference.
We talk about that a lot. You and I do.
And so let me give some examples of a value. A value would be wanting to have children. Dr. Townsend talks about you need to, in your self-development, and kind of what we talked about when it comes to finding out who you are and making yourself the right person before you're looking for the right person. You have to determine what your values are. And then having children is a value. How many times have we seen a person and we're listening to them talk and they talk about wanting children, and I'm like, but your spouse doesn't want children.
Or quantity of children.
Or quantity. How many children?
Yeah.
That's a value.
You may come from a large family and only want one child. And then the opposite is the other person. They come from a small family and they want a lot of children, right?
Right, right. So in his book, he talks about those things should not be compromised. So while you're in the dating phase, these are the things that you sort out, that you realize, I like this person, I vibe well with them, but from the get-go, we have some values here that don't add up.
Yeah.
Right?
One of the things you mentioned before was making a list. And I think this is important for young people. A time frame, 0 to 18, you're in your parents' house. 18 to 25 is exploration adult. And I heard this woman say, you have to think about adulthood as 18 being 0. And every year after 18 is how many years an adult you are. She's like, so 25, that's a 7-year-old adult, right? And I think it's important to say that because you may not know. If you're listening to this and you're 25, 26, 27, up to 30, and you've been relatively single, not necessarily, celibate, but
not necessarily, you've been dating.
Right? You may have to sit down and ask yourself, what are my values? Because values are instilled into you as children. And what happens is a lot of times we reject those values from our parents because we're rebellious. Well, I don't want to do that. But it's instilled in you. And then when you mature, you become an adult and you kind of settle in, those values are your things.
This is what we told our oldest daughter when she hit teenage years and, started getting interested in boys and wanted to bring a boy home, wanted to introduce us to him. And, she brought him by. We talked to him. And I said to her after he left, I said, that's not going to work. She's like, why? How you figure? I like him. He likes me. And I said, value system. I said, you're rejecting it now. I said, but when you hit a certain age in your adulthood, everything that you've been raised with, expectation wise, is going to come out.
Yes.
You have a value system just from how we have raised you that I can tell this young man has not been raised with that same value system.
Right.
You may not know what it is right now, but it's going to click to you one day.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. In Will Smith's book, he gives this story of a girl he was dating. And he's with this girl and they're smoking weed and blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. But as time goes on, Will Smith said in the back of his head, he thought smoking weed was something that teenagers do. We doing rebellious, but he thought that she would eventually grow out of it. And so he's in this relationship. He's like, oh, I'm done. I'm not smoking anymore. And he's waiting on her to do the same thing. But day after day, she keeps smoking. She keeps smoking. And he essentially comes to her like, okay, hey, like, when you gonna stop? And she's like, what do you mean? Yeah, I know we smoke, but we're adults now. We're not going to keep, right? And she's like, no, I smoke weed. And it was a moment for him realizing like, oh. And this was him, to your point, rebelling against his father, rebelling against his mother. But ultimately, deep down, buried inside, he had a principle that I'm not going to be doing drugs. He was doing the drugs because what do rebellious teenagers do? But deep down inside, that wasn't really him. And eventually he ran into that reality where it was like, I don't want to do this. You're still doing it. But that person is looking at them like, you switching it up on me. And this is why you need to sit down with yourself. What are my boundaries? What are my values? Because once again, you may be in a relationship with people during your rebellious stage, and you may need to understand that while you're rebelling, this is who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you try to get them to change, we talk about this in general with dating. You need to understand, does that person believe and value marriage?
Mm-hmm.
Because you may be okay with a situationship right now. You may be okay with casually dating. But if in your mind, you're like, we just casually date, it's cool with me. I'm just casually dating. But ask that person, I'm not asking you to marry me right now, but do you believe in marriage? Do you see yourself being married one day?
Right.
And if that person goes, not really,
Right.
you need to evaluate because they may be a fantastic person. You
And
may,
I don't want to cut you off, but I was
go ahead.
thinking about how this is how a lot of women waste time, waste valuable years of their life just with that alone,
Mhm.
right? You're thinking eventually we've been together, we like each other, eventually this will happen, but you never directly ask that question just simply of, I value marriage. Right now, we're doing our thing, but I ultimately want to be married. Is that something you're looking for?
Yeah.
Right. I've even had women, single friends of mine who are, mid 30s up, looking for commitment and asking the question, right? Like, ooh, but I feel like if I even bring it up on a date, he's going to run. And for me, I'm just like, what's the problem?
Hmm. Well, busting up a myth.
Okay.
I think that we have this myth that men, we know that women think about marriage. We know that women think about family. We know that little girls play with dolls and they name their dolls and they think about, and they write their names when they like a little boy, right? They change their last name to his. And we know that boys don't do none of that. We
Okay.
totally get it. However, men who want to be married, they always knew they wanted to be married, right? The same
Mm-hmm.
way women do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that men are ready to settle down. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm
Mm-hmm.
saying though is the men who get married, they know they want to get married.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the first step. We're not even going down the line of when they, just the first step is the men who want to get married know they want to get married.
Right.
And so that's not you need to, um, I don't know about the first date, but it definitely needs to be an intention conversation about what,
Right.
you go out with that person. I'm not saying you roll up, what we going on here? You get to know that person,
Mm-hmm.
but you go out on a few coffee dates, that's fine. But at some point in time, it needs to be like, hey, long term, the same way you ask, what are we, boyfriend? What are you looking for?
Right. Like ultimately, what's your end goal? Where do you see your future? Do you see, you know,
And I,
settling down, marriage, children? Or do you think you're at that stage in life yet? Are you
yeah,
dating for the purpose of looking for a wife? Or are you still in the casual, I'm not really trying to settle down right now. I'm trying to still work on my career. Those are very important questions that you should
yes,
ask because, again, when it comes to boundaries, it's establishing who you are and
yeah.
where that other person starts, what their value system is.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think where we make the mistake, or at least social media, that's what I see at least. Where we make the mistake is how you ask the question, right?
Okay.
Yes, if you sit
Explain.
down the first day, but like, look, I'm looking for marriage. What you looking for? I am gonna be like, slow down. I haven't even ordered my latte yet. Like, relax. But if you ask me, hey, what are you looking for in a relationship? Even if I never say marriage, I think that you should be able to deduce based on what I say whether or not I'm looking for a long-term committed relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You don't even have to use the word marriage.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
if you ask, hey, what are you looking for in a relationship? And I'd be like, man, I'm just trying to kick it. I'm just trying to chill. I'm just trying. That's your answer. But if
Mm-hmm.
I be like, you know what? What am I looking for? I'm looking for somebody who who can be a partner. I'm looking for somebody. You're gonna hear the language
Mm-hmm.
of I'm looking for somebody to do this thing called life with.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for somebody. They may mention children. They may mention power couple. There's going to be some word in there. They may
Mm-hmm.
directly mention marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't always have to use the word marriage. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to come right out. You can be able to gauge a
Mm-hmm.
person's intention.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the other thing that I want to mention. You can gauge how that person feels about you. I may be a man that marries, but I have no intention on marrying you.
Okay, so we were literally just vibing, okay? I like where we're going with this
Mm-hmm.
cuz I was thinking as you were talking, this is where maintaining your boundaries is important. So, as a woman, if I know that, and I don't want to say, my biological clock is ticking, but I'm at the point in life where I'm looking to settle down. In the next 1 to 2 years, I'm dating for the purpose of trying to find my one. I'm not looking for hookups or situationships. So I don't want anybody in a compromising situation. I'm looking for somebody who's financially stable, who's ready to, take that step, right? How long do you give somebody? Because if
Mm-hmm.
we're dating, things are going well. Like you said, he may be marriage material, but does he see that in you? This
Mm-hmm.
is where a boundary would come into play where you say, you know what? I'm not going to give this more than a year of my time. If within a year we're not talking marriage, I got to move on.
Mm-hmm. Unpopular opinion. You can know, you should know, and you will know whether or not a person is marriage material within a year. This culture that we have dating 5, 10, 15 years. Now, if you're 18, the high school sweethearts, I expect that of them. I'm not expecting 18-year-olds to get married. And if they make it to 30 and they're dating that's fine. But if you're above a certain age, you don't need 5 years. You're just wasting time. If
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you for 5 years, I don't know whether or not I want to marry you, I'm wasting your time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a person that's just stalling out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is, um, for whatever reason, I was going to give a reason, but for whatever reason,
Don't say for whatever reason. Let's be honest, because me and you have talked about this before. What women don't understand about men is a man, if he's content with you, right? It's kind of like, it's not my favorite ice cream, but it's good enough. It's okay,
yeah,
right? A man will, if the sex is decent, she don't really irk me too much. It's cool. She's cool. A man will be with you all the while for 5 years,
20. Let's be real.
20
We
years,
know 20-year couples.
couples, and then next thing you know, he leaves you and he gets married.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about that.
What you want me to talk about?
Yeah.
Listen, all I'm gonna say to that
But talk
is
that, but what you're saying, like, it doesn't take
it
five
does
years
it
for a
doesn't
man
no.
who is marriage material, and not
And
only that he's marriage material, he values marriage. It does not take him 5 years to figure out if he wants to marry you.
it doesn't. It
It does
doesn't.
not.
It does not.
No.
And this is why you have all of these stories of like we were dating, he moved on in 6 months, and you're thinking they must have been dating, they must have been doing no.
Nope.
Something about her clicked in him and he
Mm-hmm.
says, I want to marry this woman.
But let's bring it back to boundaries though. But this is why having boundaries, value boundaries, is important,
Mm-hmm.
because then you don't allow someone else you're not compromising your values and allowing someone else, in this example, to waste precious time.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to talk about real quick, like, what would be something to compromise? Because that could be a question like, well, what do you compromise in?
Um,
Yes.
can I speak on just I had a thought some
Go
time
ahead.
ago and then I forgot about it.
Sure.
When it comes to compromising.
Okay.
And this is for marriage. People, we crossed the boundary, we're into marriage, you're living. I think most marriages do not die from a large large wound, a cut or hurt.
Okay.
We talk about we understand infidelity, yada yada yada, abuse. We get those things. Let's those away. Why do you have the relationships where it seemed like, wait a minute, there were no infidelity, there was no abuse, nobody has a gambling problem, the big ones,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't have what's going on there?
Mm-hmm.
Irreconcilable differences.
Mm-hmm.
Most marriages die from the death of 1,000 cuts.
Mm.
And when we're talking about compromising, I want people to understand that even on the little things, you need to think about whether or not you should have a boundary. And I'm going to give an example of this. This
Okay.
may seem little, but it could be big. when you get married to a person, let's talk about holidays.
Mm-hmm.
You've been doing Thanksgiving with your family your whole life. They've been doing Thanksgiving with their family their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
Who house do you go to?
Mm.
Right? Most people choose one house and they go there for the remainder of their life.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't realize that that's a little cut. That person, the first Thanksgiving you miss, it's like, yeah, I've been Thanksgiving. But what? 10 years down the line,
Mm-hmm.
you start to feel disconnected from your
Mm-hmm.
loved ones. You start to feel like disconnected from your support system. And we can echo that times just a lot of small little things.
Mm-hmm.
The house you live in, the city you live in, right? The food you eat,
The car you drive.
the car you drive. All of these little, the curtains in your house, the color of your carpet, the color of your furniture,
Mm-hmm.
the clothes you wear.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, all of these little things, they seem so little by themselves, but it's the death of 1,000 cuts.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we start talking about your individuality, you have to consider the little things. The devil's in the details sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
For what you're doing, how you have lived your life. And it may be important to fight for those things. It may be
Mm-hmm.
important to say, hey, this year we can go to your family, but next year we're going to mine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? It has to be. Or, hey, we go to your family for Thanksgiving, but we go to my family for Christmas.
Right.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
We do this on this day, we're going to do this on this day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay. Simple things.
Mm-hmm.
Thanksgiving is interesting to me because I think that Thanksgiving to me represents family
Okay.
in so many ways. Recipes. It sounds silly,
Okay.
right? But
Mm-hmm.
every house has my grandma's recipe.
Okay.
Some way, form, or fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been used to eating your grandma's recipe in this way, and you come and that person like, we don't cook it like that. We don't cook mac and cheese like that. What you But food is a sense of comfort to us.
Mm-hmm.
That mac and cheese could have connected you back to your grandma.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily about the cheese or the flavor or the food or fulfillment. It's the emotional attachment that I have and this little thing. And now you in somebody's therapy couch going, and I couldn't even cook my grandma's mac and cheese. And we sitting there like, y'all about to get divorced over mac and cheese?
Right.
It's the death of 1,000 cuts.
Mm-hmm.
Because every little aspect, every little thing that you said, okay. And typically what you have in power dynamics of relationships is, and this is why this happens, the type of relationships that work is good and bad. Two strong personalities typically never work. They're typically attracted to each other. This is going to be your person that you forever loving, right? That person who you have a heavy attraction, but y'all can't get along for nothing. Those two people never gonna get along. The other two people are the people who have very mild personality, or however you want to word it, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Those two people will get along. They may be unhappy, but neither one of them put up a fight.
Okay.
Right? The relationship this falls into is when you have a strong personality and a person with a more milder personality.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Right? The milder personality typically compromises more and a lot. And the strong personality, what happens is they don't even realize that the other person is compromising.
And this can be either gender. So you can have a strong personality as a man and a weaker personality or passive personality as the woman, but it can also be the other way. Mm-hmm. The passive could be the man and the stronger personality could be the woman.
Yes.
Either way, the dynamics play out the same.
It plays out the
same.
same.
Where the passive personality is always compromising. And what happens, and Dr. Townsend talks about that in this book, because one of the things that we haven't mentioned that he talks about with boundaries is in a relationship, even if there are glaring problems with the other person, we could say alcoholism, gambling problem or whatever, right? If this person has glaring issues, he's a psychologist, a marriage counselor, and he would say that I would have couples come in and the person would talk about those glaring issues that the other person had, and he would look at the person and say to them, so what was your contribution to this problem? Ooh, imagine how many people probably left out of his doors and didn't come back. Because he's saying in the book that when you are in relationship, both people, if the relationship fails, both people
Mm-hmm.
took part in that relationship failing.
Mm-hmm.
And so going back to the dynamic of the stronger personality and the passive, what happens is the passive person compromises. They are unhappy. But the other part to that is a lot of times the stronger person starts to resent the passive person, because now you become almost, the passive person becomes kind of emotionally needy, because with the passive person, they've dissolved their boundaries. They no longer are a complete whole person. And the stronger personality pretty much has maintained their boundaries, right? They have their whole person.
Mm.
And what happens when you have a whole person who has boundaries and a passive person who's dissolved theirs, the passive person becomes needy and starts to pull on the stronger person.
Give you an example of this: friendships.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You may have a situation, you get into a relationship, marriage down the line, and the passive, once again, and the stronger personality may have never asked for this. It just kind of happens. And the passive person in this situation, friends call, hey, what you doing? I'm just chilling tonight. I'm just hanging out. Hey, you want to come out? Nah, I'm just gonna hang here with it. Nobody asked you for that, right? Time goes by. You know what happens when you don't go out? You eventually don't get invited. We fast forward that 5 years, 10 years down the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, the strong person is going, hey, I'm going out with friends. Hey, can I come? No, I just want to go out with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Now that person feels like, what about me?
Rejected.
This is the needy part.
Mm-hmm.
Well, call your friends up. You go out with your friends. That's just go out with them. They don't have no friends. You're their friend.
Mm-hmm.
You're the person. You don't recognize all the times they got that phone call and they said, no, not tonight.
Mm-hmm.
You don't recognize all the times where it was competing events and they chose your event. All the
Right.
times where it's just over and over and over again. And then that person, to your point, is now they're kind of dependent on you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking at them like, what? Just
And
go
you
live your
start to
life.
resent them.
Yes.
And now, like you said, the 1,000 cuts, the relationship is starting to dissolve. Because I think with the stronger personality has to recognize and encourage their spouse or their partner. Wait a minute. Was that your friend that called you? You canceled on them two weeks now. Go out with your girls. Or
Right.
why are you not hanging out with your guys? You have to be intentional about not allowing your partner to dissolve their boundaries
Mm-hmm.
because it's convenient for you.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
And then what happens when the arguments? Because the passive person is going to say, I don't have any friends because of you.
There you go.
And then the
And
more
I
assertive,
did this
because
for
of you.
you.
And the more assertive person is going to look at them and go, what do you mean?
I didn't ask you to do
How are
that.
you blaming something on me?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Now I'm offended. How are you blaming something on me
Right.
when I never asked nothing about this? I never said that to you.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's on both people.
Yep.
But a lot of times that assertive person, not to cut them slack, a lot of times they know.
Yeah.
They know. And they're also playing a role in, because it's convenient for them.
Right.
I mean, shoot, if they don't want to go out with their friends, they don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to do this, they don't want to go. If they cool with missing, you never
They
ask
make
that
themselves
question.
100% available for me.
Yeah.
And that's convenient for me.
That's gonna mean I never told them to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And we see that a lot in relationships. And then that person, they break up, they're a narcissist. And this is why the person is looking like narcissist. Why am I a narcissist? Because it's a blame game, but nobody's taking accountability for their actions in this game.
Right. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why maintaining boundaries are so important. Because without them, you cannot have a lasting or a happy, fulfilling long-term relationship without having those healthy boundaries.
Okay. So let's go into one of our controversial questions for today.
Okay.
This is all over, especially in the age of technology, because we have smartphones that track us you can be tracked like none before. And this is one of the things that, we talk about a lot, where I enjoy the access. I enjoy being able to talk to people who are across the world and check in on them, and they're able to, right? And all of that good stuff. But sometimes too much access is a problem. And I think we're in a space now across the world, privacy is every anytime you log into a computer or tablet, it's always talking about privacy, 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 privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Because we've gotten to a space where we really don't have privacy.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're comfortable posting our food, what we're doing, where we're at. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're comfortable putting our business on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And so now you run into people in these relationships and they expect you to be like your Facebook page, an open book. When I hit join, I should be able to see everything within your life.
Mm-hmm.
Everything you're doing. I
Mm-hmm.
should have access to all of your friends and all of your activities, right? And
I'd
so the
like to add to
question,
that. It's almost like a blur of boundaries with so much social media.
it
And then
is.
when we get into relationship, right? Because naturally there should be some kind of boundaries. We don't know where to start with that
Mm-hmm.
or where that ends. Yeah.
So I'm gonna ask this question, then I'm gonna let you go.
Okay.
Should partners be expected to disclose everything, including past relationships, to maintain trust? Is full transparency a sign of love or a breach of personal privacy? And then the caveat question to that is directly to what we're talking about. Should a partner have access to your phone if you have nothing to hide? The phone question. But
Uh,
let's start with the bigger question, then we'll touch on the phone.
I wanted to start with the phone one. That was easier.
Oh, go ahead.
Um, Again, partner, we talking about long-term committed relationship. We are together in this journey. We've said we're together whether we're married or not, but we in this together. I, to me personally, I think that's a silly question. Um I know your phone code, you know mine. The only
Mm-hmm.
reason why I even have a code on there is just in case the phone were to get lost and somebody can't just access my phone. But I mean, now we both have iPhones. I can see where you're driving. You know what I mean? It's silly to me. I have nothing to hide. You have nothing to hide. But we also don't go through each other's phones, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have built trust through the years, the 14 years of our relationship. So to me, that's a silly question. To me, that's a simple one. If you are, I feel like if you don't want to give access to your partner, there's some trust issues there. And if you got to look through your partner's phone, you got trust issues too, and both of you need to go to counseling. Because I just think that's a silly question. Yeah, you should have access to each other's phone. Whenever I've said, hey, let me see your phone, you never hesitated. You didn't ask me what I need it for. And it just could be simply because I was trying to remember something, and you do it with me all the time. Like, oh, hand me your phone. I just text you something, but it's for me. And I'll give you my phone. You do what you do or whatever. It's not even a thought.
Mm-hmm.
So if it's a problem for either of you, you need counseling.
Mm-hmm.
You have trust issues. And I'll just let that go.
In the book, I want to add to your point about searching through.
Okay.
In the book, The Courage to Be Disliked, he talks about how the reasons why you should not search for things.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because searching you shall find. And he basically says, when you have an idea, you can almost find any evidence to validate your idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes you can do yourself more damage by searching through somebody's phone and finding a nugget of something that's really nothing.
Mm-hmm.
That's really nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But you can convince yourself
Mm-hmm.
that it's something way more than it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I tend to live by the expression my mama used to say, the bed is too long and the cover's too short.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that, I just firmly believe that if somebody is truly doing wrong, you can't hide it.
It's gonna come to light.
It's going to come to light.
Mm-hmm.
It's as everybody thinks they're the greatest, thief in the world, but it's going to come to light.
Let me add to this since we're talking about boundaries. This is a good example of that. Part of healthy boundaries, remember I said a lot of us are functionally mentally ill, and we experience some negative things and we develop some unhealthy habits. Maybe we came from, some situations where we're lacking in trust. And so we had some unhealthy tendencies, looking through phones, very paranoid and things like that. One of the boundaries that you would have to work on with yourself is I'm not looking through my partner's phone. I'm working on being able to trust, right? Because like you said, Whatever is in the dark is going to come to light. But that's a personal boundary for yourself, because what happens is you can spiral out to mental control.
Yeah. Let me speak on something that may happen, and people may have different opinions on this is good or bad.
Okay.
The reality is, though, marriage has its ups and downs. And what happens when I'm just venting to my friends about my spouse, and you go through my phone and you read my venting, right? And it's literally just that. I have a group chat with my friends that were all married, and we typically put stuff like, "Oh, my wife is tripping," and we kind of laugh about it and joke, right? But if you find that chat and read through it and take it, that can feel like a breach of privacy. But this goes once again into the boundaries, because each person needs a healthy space to vent.
But let's caveat to that, though.
Yes.
When it comes to marriage, advice that we always give married couples is, as a man, you don't vent to another woman
Yes.
about your woman. So the friend group that you're talking about are all married men
Yes.
that you're venting to, right? So you're not venting to another woman about me, and vice versa. I'm not venting to another man. If I'm venting, it's to my girls. You get what I'm saying? And even to a degree, we also are careful not to do that with family. You get what I'm
Yes.
saying? You need to have friends that are married, happily married, in your friendship circle. And when it comes to venting, you don't vent to your family about your spouse.
This is why we say healthy, because
Right.
it has to be a space. The reason why it's healthy, to be honest with you, right? And this happens to a lot of people. You see it all the time. Sometimes you need to. So number one, it needs to be same sex. Let's talk about each thing and why.
Okay. Yes.
Same sex. The reason why we talk about same sex is because emotional closeness will happen when you're doing that venting, and there has to be a boundary. It's okay to have opposite sex friends. That's fine. A lot of people say, no, you don't. The problem that we have is, and I talk about this all the time, we don't have appropriate relationships with the opposite sex a lot of times. And so we don't know how to deal with the opposite sex. And we think that it's all free. And it's like, it's no. There still has to be boundaries set within that. And so part of that is protecting your spouse from that person, right? Number two, they need
And
to be
protecting yourself
and protecting
from
yourself
putting yourself in a compromising,
from temptation.
because like you said, temptation, because when you're down in marriage and you've been venting to this opposite sex chemistry, right? It's like you prevent all of that from happening if you already have a boundary.
Yeah. Men say a shoulder to crown becomes a, I don't know what women say, but but yeah, it becomes that emotionally vulnerable, yada yada yada. It's the cleanup lady. We got songs about it,
Right.
And then you be surprised who like you, and you complaining about all the stuff your spouse not do magically.
The other person doing it.
They gonna do it.
Right.
You complain that they not do it. You giving them the playbook.
Right. Yep.
About all the stuff.
Yep.
But as TD Jakes says, never leave your 80 for 20. Just a word to the wise.
We'll have to talk about that later.
So same sex. The next thing is married. The reason why married is because you need people who understand, and preferably longer, same or longer than you. Because you need people who understand the ups and downs of marriage and relationships, so they understand that you are in fact venting. They understand that you going back home that night. They're not trying to pull you in. Sometimes the issue with single friends are, they like, shoot, that's why I ain't married. I don't know how you do it. Shoot, I had a girl over, I had a dude over. That's why I keep a rotation. They're inviting you to temptation, not with themselves, but through their actions.
Right.
And this is why it becomes difficult. Now, everybody gets married at different times. It was a point in time where I was married and my friends wasn't. I'm not saying to give up your single friends. But what I am saying to you, though, is be mindful of who you're talking to when you're engaging with this and where they are in life. Right? The next thing is family. Particularly opposite sex family. And the reason why is because your family's protective over you. And as a man, if I'm venting to my sisters, my aunties, my mama,
Mm-hmm.
she's gonna mistreat that lady.
Right.
Let's just be honest.
True.
And a lot of men have made that mistake because we talked about this before. A lot of times men don't have a place to vent. I may not have these friends. I may not feel comfortable. You know what I'm saying? My guys may be cool, but I'm like, they ain't the space to be expressing my emotions. And that's real. And so we end up going to our sister. We end up going to our mother, and we go to them and we complain, and they listen and they comfort us, and we like feel good. And then we show up at Thanksgiving. And now she's wondering, you just tripping. No, they mistreating her.
Mm-hmm.
Because they feel like, what you doing to my brother?
Mm-hmm.
Right? They start
Right.
saying things because you mentioned the thing, man. She don't even cook me no food. Was that week, or is that because you forgot about it? You complained in April that she wasn't cooking. It's November, but now they looking at her. Look, and say she ain't even bring no dish to Thanksgiving. Look at her. Look, she ain't even fix this, and it just keeps going, and it creates issues. And now you're trying to call like, hey, mama, calm down. She's good. They can't forget it, right?
Right.
So when we talking about family, it's okay if it's same sex. Your uncles, your father, if your brothers, if they're married, going back, same principles apply, right? I think that's okay. But opposite is different. And the same for women, because that man is going to become protective over his daughter, niece,
Right.
sister.
Right.
And so he's going to start looking at you like, man, you ain't no real man. What you doing to my sister? So you got to be mindful about where you're placing that venting, because this is your person, hopefully forever.
Right.
And y'all are going to go through ups
Right.
and downs
Right.
and it's going to be rocking back and forth. And you need people who understand that rocking back and
Right.
forth,
Right.
because when you would have long forgotten that dispute,
Yep.
but people don't forget, because you have to remember they don't see this person often.
Right.
You see this person theoretically 365 days a year. So 5 of those days may be terrible, but you're able to make up in your mind from the other 360. But the 5 days they were terrible, you call your mama all 5 days, and your mama ain't seen this lady. She got 5 memories of you that are all negative.
Right.
And then she's going to interact with you in person, and it's probably going to be negative,
Right.
because we know how that clashing goes.
Right.
And same vice versa. So, yeah,
Okay.
we went off on a tangent there,
All
but
right.
go ahead.
Okay, so going back to the other question, you had asked, should partners be expected to disclose everything, including past relationships, to maintain trust? Is full transparency a sign of love or a breach of personal privacy? Ooh.
I got thoughts on that.
You have thoughts on that? Okay, go ahead, share. I have thoughts too, but you go first.
There's an expression, ignorance is bliss.
Okay.
And I often say the older I get, the more I understand that expression. I used to perceive it as ignorance as a negative thing, like the stupid are just happy because they don't know, they don't know what's going on. And I think the older I get, I understand that expression to say, does having this information change anything? That's always my question, right? Does having this information change anything? So, for example, past relationships. If it's my best friend, probably yes. If it's Johnny Blow, does having this information change anything, right? And what it could change is my emotions. And this is why the ignorance is bliss, because now I may have information that makes me judge you or look at you different, or whatever the case may be, or maybe it just hurt. Maybe nothing new. It just hurts me. But the truth is, it has nothing to do with me. Before my time, all that good stuff. And I'm not saying that you should lie or disclose, but I will say that, going back to the point, I think that some people are overshare. And it's like, does having this information benefit? Right? And other times, I do think that disclosure makes you closer. Because if this is something that impacts that person's life, yes, they should share it with you, because you need to understand who they are. That whether it's happy or or sad, whether it's traumatic or enthusiastic,
Right.
right? Sharing makes you closer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I do think there, once again, is one of those thin line things.
Mm-hmm.
What I don't think, what I will say is that to some extent, once again, if this information does not impact you or the relationship, to some extent, I think disclosure, particularly of the past, I will say,
Mm-hmm.
should be up to the person.
Mm-hmm.
Should be up to the person. Like, don't force me. This whole thing with body counts, man, who you been? Don't force me to give you information
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not ready to give. Now, if I give it to you, I
Mm-hmm.
give it to you. That's my prerogative.
Mm-hmm.
But I think we get into a space a lot of times where this becomes dangerous, where we're trying to force people to give us information about themselves that they don't want to give.
Or that we're not even close enough to be giving. I know that for me and you, we've been married for 14 years. And in this 14 years, we've discovered each other. We didn't sit down and have a diarrhea of the mouth session and just blurt out, this is everybody I've been with, this is everything I've done. We didn't do that
No.
at all. At all.
Mm-mm.
Even just some life experiences. As we've gone on in this journey, we've learned more about each other. We've matured, we've grown, our value systems are coming to play. We've clashed a little bit. We had to talk about it. We had to compromise. Situations have come out, and it's like, even just the other day with our son and him having some a little bit of a speech impediment, and we were talking to the teacher, and I had shared about, yeah, I had to have speech when I was in third, fourth grade, and explained some things, and you looked at me after we got off the phone, you're like, never knew that you had speech in third grade. You're going to discover things
Mm-hmm.
about each other. So what I thought about with that question is, is it a value, or is it insecurity? Is it trivial?
There's a difference between a secret and not disclosing.
True. True.
And I think where this question comes from, should you
Mm-hmm.
disclose everything?
Mm-hmm.
It's really rooted in secrets.
Mm-hmm.
And secrets are bad.
And the secrets that could hurt. So, like an example you gave, if you've slept with my best friend, let's say it was, I don't know, there was even a movie about that. It was Morris Chestnut in it, and Gabrielle Union. I
Oh, I
tell
thought you were talking about the best man.
no, no,
when they
no,
when what's the name slept with his wife?
no, no.
Okay.
It was another movie. I can't even think of what the movie is called now. But in the movie, she was dating him, right? And he invited her over to a party at his parents. His parents are divorced or whatever. And she saw his father there. Come to find out, she had had a relationship with his father. They never went into the detail of what the relationship consisted of. It was a romantic, brief or what all was done, but it was just like, oh my God, right? And so she went to talk to his mother at first about it, and he ended up finding out about it, and he was upset about it. And so, I mean, long story short, if I'm remembering the movie correctly, the mother was like, she tried to tell me, but I didn't let her. Your father actually told me. But basically the point was, it wasn't a secret. She went to the father like, you have no pictures up of him? I have no clue that this man was your son, right? And in that case, the truth came out right there. This is what happened. You make a decision as to whether or not you want to move forward with me or not. That's a good example of, yeah, that's some information I need to know.
Mm-hmm.
There's a difference between a secret that could hurt me, right? Valuable information versus,
Well, I guess, yeah. I guess secret implies I'm intentionally withholding.
yes.
That's what I'm saying. It wasn't a secret that you had speech therapy. It just never came up,
True.
right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a big difference between the two.
Okay.
A secret is, you probably should know this.
Right.
And I
Right.
need to make sure you don't find out because I think that this could affect. Secrets are bad
Right.
because you can't hide them forever.
Right.
So to your point, if you do have a secret, it's best to come forward and say, hey,
Mm-hmm.
this is what it is,
Mm-hmm.
and deal with the consequences.
Right.
And to be honest with you, that's how you make your relationship stronger.
Mm-hmm.
Because if that person goes, okay, and maybe they get upset, maybe, and they go and they process it with it, it's for them to process.
Mm-hmm.
It's not for you. It's for them to process. And
Mm-hmm.
if they process it and they come back and they say we good, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
But if we go years
Mm-hmm.
and then I find out you slept with my father
Mm-hmm.
and we years, that feels like betrayal.
Right.
And that's what we get caught up at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'll leave it there on my point.
Okay. Okay. Moving on.
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
we be hour in. This is gonna be good. We can talk about this. Boundaries in marriage. I'm gonna skip over a lot of this stuff and get
Which
right
segment
to
we
the
in?
meat. I'm in segment 4.
Okay.
Emotional and physical boundaries and intimacy. Should partners have the right to say no to sex in marriage? Or does marriage imply obligation?
That's for me to answer.
Yeah, it's for you. I'll follow up.
Okay. 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 Um, should partners have the right to say no to sex in marriage, or does marriage imply an obligation? The answer is yes. Each partner has a right to say no to sex in marriage. Um, I know to anything in marriage. Because again, we are autonomous beings. Us getting married doesn't mean that I own your body and you own my body. I know that there's this idea of free use that I think more so has men have applied to marrying a woman, and the exchange of vows means that you have free use with that woman's body. No, sir,
Mhm,
not at
mhm.
all. Um, and if you want me to get into the why, um, just for one, men and women are biologically wired differently when it comes to sex and desire. Um, how deep you want me to get with this?
Talk.
Okay.
I'll,
All right. Um, let's go to the end part here where it says
So,
this. Go ahead.
no, I'll pick up
Okay.
a little bit. So, this is from, this is from Love and Respect by Dr. Emerson Eggerichs. Um, and he encourages honesty about, well, a combination of 2 books, actually. There's a book that I want to mention also, too.
Mhm.
It's called Men in Love,
Mhm.
and My Secret Garden by Nancy Friday.
Mhm.
If you're having, it's a good book to read for couples. I'll say that. I'll leave it at that. I'll let you explore. Don't listen to it with the kids in the car or read it. Right?
Uh-huh.
It's not necessarily like what's those books people read, like the Zane books.
Mhm.
It's not a sexual fantasy books per se, like fiction.
Right.
It's a non-fiction book that talks about sex.
Mhm. And how sex and fantasies are different for
Men and
women
women,
than men.
extremely different from men and women.
Right.
So, in boundaries,
Mhm.
um, I'm just gonna read this.
Okay.
These books encourage honesty about needs by allowing individuals to openly express their desires, emotional expectations, and limitations in a relationship. This level of transparency can lead to a deeper intimacy as partners gain a better understanding of each other's vulnerabilities and emotional requirements. When both individuals feel safe enough to communicate their needs without fear of judgment, the relationship can flourish with a foundation of trust and mutual respect. Open dialogue about desires also reduce misunderstandings, helping couples navigate sensitive topics and clarify with clarity and compassion. All of this to say, it's important that you talk about sex. It's in a non-sexual way, right?
Mhm.
It's important to, they talk about, let me just go over, he says, desires emotional expectations and limitations. Desires. Part of the issue with us not being celibate, and most of us will not be, is we all have different sexual experiences.
Mm-hmm.
There's a study, another book that's not mentioned here, and it talks about how a lot of us, but I'm talking men develop their sexual desires a lot of times in adolescence based on experiences that they have. And this is why you see, the teacher fantasy. When you look at, adult films, and you kind of look at some of the fantasies and think about it. Don't think about it from an adult because it wouldn't make sense. And I know this is tough for us to hear, but it's the reality. Think about it from the point of a teenage child. And from a point of a teenage child, the teacher fantasy makes sense, right? Certain things make sense when you look at it from that perspective,
Okay.
right? And so that's how men develop their desires. And then we have these sexual experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And then within the sexual experiences, we have trauma that happens.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that trauma is not even recognized. I think about, I believe it's Dion Cole, the comedian. There's a few people that
Mm-hmm.
talked about having sex with older women at
Mm-hmm.
13 or 14 years old,
Right.
and not realizing that he was abused until he was well into his adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
because he thought he was getting it from an older woman.
Mm-hmm.
And then he became an adult and was like, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
These experiences shape your expectations.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing is true for women.
Mm-hmm.
The trauma, whether it's known or unknown, shapes your sexual experiences, but it also shapes your desire and how you want to,
Mm-hmm.
things you want to do with sex, right?
Mm-hmm.
For men, we over expect. And for women, I think women under express. Men want women, once I say we in this relationship, I want you to do it the way I want you to do it.
When,
All, when, how,
how,
right?
whenever, right?
Because
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And we talked about the men have needs. If I can't get it from you or somebody else will, another, we use all of these expressions. But what you're saying is, and this goes back into the boundaries. Well, one woman won't, another one will. You got to have your boundaries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because, and we talked about this too. I think what happens with women a lot of time and men in this expectation thing is that a lot of times women do sexual things that they do not want to do. And then they come along, time goes by, and they say, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore. And now, whether it's the same man or a different man is going, what you mean? You used to do this. This is what I'm used to. But she never wanted to do it. And this is the authenticity of yourself. This is being yourself. This is your boundaries. You went outside of your boundary. You was uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
but you did it.
Mm-hmm.
Now the expectation is there.
Mm-hmm.
The underexpressing,
Mm-hmm.
right? The underexpressing comes in where women are not expressing their fantasies.
Mm-hmm.
Have you gone to your husband, a man, and say, this is how I want to do it?
Mm-hmm.
This is what I want to do. That may free you up, but women don't do it for fear of judgment.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be a fear. It could be a fear of a lot of things. Sorry, you was about to say something.
I was, when you had said that, which is a common phrase you hear men saying, like men have needs. And I've said this to you a lot because that irks my soul when I hear that. Men don't have needs. Human beings have needs. Sex is natural for men and for women, and sex is a need for both men and for women. We're just biologically wired differently. And so, and something I also add to that is I don't think, again, coming from my nursing background, we don't understand our bodies. And when I say us, I mean men and women. Sex is simply the desire for it, the being horny is a hormone being released in your brain.
Mm-hmm.
Biologically, I mean literally biologically, the hormone, the amount of hormone release for horniness, how often is literally different night and day for men and for women.
Mm-hmm.
So I think understanding that when you say let's talk about sex, let's talk about it in a non-sexual way. Let's just talk about anatomy and physiology of the human body.
Yeah.
And I think for me and you, we have come to a better understanding of and probably have a better sex life just because we've kind of come to some of these realizations of realizing and examples that we see of. And I think even as you as a man realizing, like, this is a hormone that's being released in my head, right? And it is literally biologically different for me and for you. And then I always say, but God made us that way.
Mm-hmm.
He literally made us with different sex drives. Why would he do that?
That's another question for another time. Because you already know, some brothers listen, because men was not meant to be with one. That's the route.
Gosh.
But we can talk about that another time.
We'll talk
though.
about that another time.
Um,
But there's a reason for that, and it's not the popular idea that's floating around now.
Yeah.
But there's a reason for that. Mm-hmm. But again, getting back to the point of that though, understanding that and going from there, right? And understanding that for women, let's talk about women in our bodies. And I think that this conversation is now starting to become a little bit more public, because for so long, sex has been taboo, especially for women,
mm-hmm.
right? And so now I think we're starting to talk about it more. And with talking about it more, we're also realizing, hormonal changes are a monthly thing for women. For the most part, men's hormone levels don't change. Mm-hmm. Once you guys hit puberty, for the most part, your hormone levels, you don't go through fluctuations. Your hormone levels pretty much stayed the same until you start becoming, getting into your middle, older male range. And then, your testosterone or whatever, for the most part, you start losing muscle mass. But for the most part, your hormone level never changes. For women, it is the total opposite. The moment a girl hits puberty and starts to have menses, that's a monthly hormonal change. You get a hormonal change at the beginning of it, you have a hormonal change during it, and you have a hormonal change once it stops. Ovulation, you're talking about a monthly hormonal change for life that women go through. And then once they get past that, the middle age to the older, then they go through menopause. And now they hit menopause and all those hormones go, and now they literally start having some physical changes to the vaginal area. I mean, women go through a lot. So when you're talking about sex, I think you need to approach it from a non-sexual perspective and just understanding what's going on with my wife's body. Mm-hmm. Because again, sex is a hormone. Sex is a thought, an urge produced from the mind. So, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
I am, but go ahead, finish your point.
Okay. So my point simply being is we start talking about it more. Mm-hmm. Right? We start talking about when you're in the mood, when you're not in the mood, right? We start learning each other. We can gauge now when you're in the mood, when it's not in the mood, right? We are now so open about it. I've heard, I think just a couple of days ago, somebody was talking about on a radio show about just reconnecting with your partner. And somebody asked the question, do you put sex on the calendar? And she laughed, but she said, yeah, you do. She said, we put sex on the calendar. She said, because once you get married, you start having children, occupation, just so much to do. That can be put on the back burner, especially for women, because it's not our natural inclination, right? Men, when they are going through something emotionally, and men look for sex as a release. That's your natural inclination, to look for comfort between the legs of a woman. That's not a woman's natural inclination to look for release in a sexual way, right? So even when we're going through life and we're experiencing things, we have the same emotions: anxiety, fear, worry, rejection. But how we express it, a lot of times for men, there's a need for comfort, but it's in a sexual way. That's not how women are biologically wired. Mm-hmm. So where we are in our relationship, being married 14 years now, since we have that understanding, we talk about it. Mm-hmm. We put it on the calendar. We have an expectation now where we say, we don't want to go this long without having sex. We don't want to go this long without connecting with each other in that way. And we're intentional about doing that. We don't use it as a punishment to each other. And we might have to talk about this in another one, but we also don't use it as a reward system with each other either, right? We don't do transactional. We do mutual, right? Because we both, sex again is not a male need. Sex is a human being need. And we may need it, at different levels or increments or whatever, but we find a compromise.
Yeah. I'm always thinking of counter arguments,
Okay.
but not necessarily to go against you, but to highlight it.
Okay.
One of the things that you and I often talk about is what confuses men, and many to understand, is that this is all women.
I know where you're
However,
going with this because I told you
single
that
women
are in heat.
are in heat.
And I have said it and I will
And
say it again. Single women are in heat.
So for men, a lot of times we're gauging our marriage based on our interaction with single women,
Yep.
right? We like, shoot, when. And by single, I literally mean unmarried. And it's the reason why I'm saying that. It's because sex is a hormone, it is emotional. A lot of times, there's plenty of studies to show this, right? When a woman is trying to mate a man almost, and she's single, meaning he's not committed, she's more in heat. She's horny more, right? It's that hormone is releasing because that's that natural thing, right? But once that woman gets married, she falls out of heat.
Yep.
And this is in essence why every married joke across every sitcom, every husband,
Every
once you
comedian.
get married, and so the argument, well, that's why I ain't getting married. But that's a whole nother topic why I didn't get married. But this is why communication is important and understanding why that is. Understanding if your goal is marriage is going to happen to you. And this is why you need married friends. Because once again, if you that married person talking to those single guys, it's tough. They're gonna be like, see, this is why, because, but no, a lot of times, two things. Single women are in heat, and they're allowing you to cross boundaries that they don't believe in.
Right.
And those two things create this fantasy idea of women, and then when you get married, those two things snap away.
Yep.
Now, the boundaries thing a lot of times sometimes comes from the fact that I think from a very early age, somehow or another, women kind of lose control of their body, right? You have sex we talk about pressure. Well, if you love me, you have, right? And you do it. A lot of times girls don't want to, but they do it. And it becomes kind of a pattern. And I think this is also leads into why the women sometimes don't enjoy sex, because they've always just kind of given their body to be used, but not necessarily, they did it because they felt like, well, this will make him happy.
An obligation.
It's an obligation.
Right.
And then you hit a point in your adulthood where women want to take their body back. And this is where it's like, we're not having sex. And you're like, what's going on? She's taking her body back. And this is why in a partnership, in a mutual relationship, it's important to have those conversations so that when she is giving herself to you, if you will, that she's actually giving herself to you, right? And you're not just taking it, whether it's literal taking or that person is doing it out of obligation, because ultimately
it breeds resentment.
it breeds resentment.
It breeds resentment.
Anything else on that?
No, I think we hit that.
Okay. Well, we have 5 controversial questions. At the end of our podcast, we've decided to kind of pick out questions that are provided to us either through our videos, through private chat, or in person as we're doing these podcasts. So we kind of pick out the ones that kind of stand out a little to us, things that kind of repeat themselves. And so we have 5 questions. So
5? I have 4.
4 questions, not 5.
All right. First question. We can opposite. You could do the first one. Is it ever acceptable to have private friendships with the opposite sex that your partner doesn't know about?
Key words in this: private and doesn't know about. The answer is no. Secrecy is always breeds. It's like, is it fungus? What grows in the dark? Mold. Nothing good happens in the dark.
Fungus.
Nothing good. You put anything in the dark for too long, it's gonna come out bad. You know, And so secrets represent the dark.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, if there's nothing to hide, there's no purpose in hiding this person or keeping secrets.
Okay.
So I feel like that's pretty straightforward.
Okay.
But what I think this question hints to though is it okay? Let me answer this though. Is it okay to have friends of the opposite sex? And funny enough, this is talked about in the book by Dr. John Townsend, Boundaries in Marriage. And he says not only is it okay, but it's almost necessary. And I think this is true, especially for men. You need to have female friends that you mutually respect,
That you've never slept
that
with,
you've never slept with,
never wanted to sleep with, never
never wanted,
fantasize about sleeping with.
and you mutually respect so that you can learn the woman's perspective, unfiltered, without any emotions. The last two parts are very important because when you're not sleeping with that person, you can receive whatever they're saying, and then it makes you kind of consider like, oh, and you can kind of process and you can kind of understand the opposite sex. This, once again, you're still not venting to them about your spouse. That's not what we're talking about. But to understand, because men and women literally think differently. Now, you may have gotten this perspective. Maybe you got an older sister or a younger sister. Maybe you got a brother. Maybe you got it from there.
Mm-hmm.
People talk about relationship with their aunts and uncles. Maybe you got it from there.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to have relationships with the opposite sex that are platonic,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can understand the opposite sex.
Okay. All right.
Mm.
Your turn.
Are tests in relationships ever justified? I'm gonna pose that question. I'm gonna leave out the fluff because I like the question. Are tests in relationship ever justified?
Yes and no. Something that I've heard told to women in dating is to see a man's temperament. So where I would say that yes, cancel a date last minute. See how he responds to that. Um, and I know somebody might be like, "What? What are you talking about?" But a lot of times, again, when we're dating, we're catering to, we're dissolving boundary lines. You don't tell that person no. And so, how does that person respond when you tell them no? So, yeah, being intentional about maybe canceling dinner plans and saying, I can't make it.
Mm-hmm.
See how that man responds, right? Is he level headed? Is he like, okay, we can reschedule? Does he get extremely angry, right? You want to see how he responds to you saying no. So, in that case, yes, I would say testing in a small way like that. But if you're talking about, because I can see the question, but if you're talking about testing in the sense of, I see videos on social media where your girlfriend, your sister maybe even, is at your house and your boyfriend's on the way over there and you intentionally, she's half dressed, half naked, right? And she's kind of flirting with him. You're intentionally trying to set it up to see if he would do something with her. That's toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be coming from a place because you've experienced a man who had no boundaries, right? You've experienced a man who was insatiable that would sleep with your sister in your house. You might have experienced those things. But I will say this, if you feel the urge to test somebody in that way, you're not ready to be in a relationship. You need to go to counseling. You need to process those emotions and feeling because it's coming from an unhealthy place and it's toxic behavior. And it doesn't matter if he passed that test. If you are at the point where you're doing toxic behavior like that, he can never satisfy your trust. And you're going to constantly be working to catch him up in something because part of trust comes from within. You're in a healthy mental space so you can allow yourself to trust. So I would say if you're doing extreme things like that, you're not even mentally healthy enough to even be in a relationship. And that's my answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
My turn. Next question.
Sure.
Can a relationship survive if one partner sets a boundary that completely denies the other's core needs, like sex, children, or faith?
No, core needs. The first thing I think about is remember boundaries are for you,
Mm-hmm.
and with the except with the exception of something like sex or something like that, a lot of times people are creating boundaries and try to control, and then it becomes the problem. So let's move away from sex and talk about faith. I know plenty of couples where one person goes to church and the other doesn't. And I know we're gonna be like equally yoked. Listen, not everybody's a holy roller. Let's just be honest. There are couples that will be perfectly okay, right? One is Catholic, one is not. One goes to church if they will be perfectly okay if they respect each other's boundaries, right? Now, if I'm trying to control you and go, why are you getting up and going to church? Why? That's the problem,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so any time you're set to control another person's actions, it's never going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And as we said, with things like sex and stuff like that, there has to be a compromised communication. You cannot be so rigid that, it
Mm-hmm.
is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that may be a boundary for yourself. It's
Mm-hmm.
always better to, and this is for everybody, if sex is that big of an issue and you've tried to work it out and you've tried to compromise and y'all been to counseling, you've exhausted, it's better to leave than cheat.
Mm-hmm.
Just leave.
Mm-hmm.
Right? If it's that bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's gotten to a point, like I see these stories sometimes, it's like me and my wife didn't have sex for 3 years. It's like, why was you still there?
Mm-hmm.
Why would you still? What was the purpose?
Mm-hmm.
Now we're not talking about a week or two. If you're in the years,
And we're not talking about, again, when you're in a committed relationship, things happen. People get sick. We're not
yes,
talking about somebody who's dealing with,
illness and
cancer, illness, something that makes it physically impossible for them to engage in the act in that way, right? There's other ways to be intimate.
mhm.
And that's where that communication comes into play. But we're not talking about things like that. We're literally just talking about um,
Two healthy human beings and one just saying no.
and one just saying no, or because they have those thousand cuts you talked about, right? And we talk about it being a hormone, as being an emotion, and you can get to a point where you're like, I don't want, because what we didn't talk about is that sex is invasive for women, right? You're going into my body, and you can get to a point in a relationship where it's like, I don't want to do that with you.
Yeah, one of the things we've talked about, and we'll talk about doing the infidelity piece that we do, is that we say cheating is a symptom to a problem,
Hmm.
but let's scale it back. Lack of sex is a symptom to a
To a
problem
problem, right? Hmm.
because, as you mentioned, sex is a human need.
Right.
I'm not an absolute. I'm not a absolutist. I believe there's some people who probably are not lying when they say they don't desire sex. There are probably some people. I still believe it's attached to trauma, but there's some people. But I think most people want sex,
Hmm.
right? Like like you say, it may differ in frequency and yada yada, right? But most people want it. But there's an issue in the relationship that you guys have not solved, and it's not about. And so at that point, it's not a boundary issue,
Hmm.
right? It's not a boundary. That person is setting boundaries because they don't be bothered with you, or you cause them pain or something like that. But it's not a boundary issue. Yeah, it's a connection issue.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay.
I guess I got to take the last one. You can ask it.
Um, does being a financial provider give someone more say in relationship boundaries?
Nope,
Mm.
it doesn't. And for the men going, what if I pay all the bills? When you got with that woman, you knew you was gonna pay all the bills. Stop, partner. Okay, if it should always be a partnership. And if I get with a woman, and hopefully one day, if this podcast blows up, I'll retire you. I'm still gonna be working, but I don't see it as I'm the one making the money, right? Ain't nobody coming to see you, Otis, right? This is a partnership, and if you are a man that does not want to be a sole provider, then get a woman that is working.
But
And
let's caveat to that though. because now we're in the day and age where a lot of women are making more than their husbands.
Mm-hmm.
And so the conversation is coming up. Now, should the women who are making more, the breadwinners in the house, be able to do what men were doing?
We've talked about that from a masculinity femininity perspective, how it doesn't work, right? Um, Masculinity dictates that men lead, and femininity dictates that women want to follow that leadership. So that'll always be there, but we abuse it, right? So the only reason why that relationship will work, where the man makes all the money, he controls everything, and the woman submits, is because femininity wants to submit to something naturally.
It's a submissive energy.
A submissive
Is
energy,
what you're saying. Okay.
right? But it won't work in the other way around, because when that woman is making the money and she's calling the shots, she's still going to be unhappy
Because she doesn't respect that man.
because you don't respect the
Because
man.
her femininity is looking for masculinity.
Exactly.
The complement to that.
Exactly. Right. And so, but women do that, and we talk about how in this time frame where women are getting more rights and are equal to men, equality does not equal sameness.
Okay.
And we talked about that before. And so, once again, the feminine energy wants to submit to masculine energy, right? And just because you're now equal does not mean that I'm going to do, and we talked about this, I'm going to do what men do. And I think we're seeing that a lot, where women think that equality is doing what men do. And we have to acknowledge that, number one, a lot of the things that men were doing were not right. Let's just start there. So if it was abuse on one side, it's abuse on the other.
Right.
It's not right. So let's just start there. It's like, but then number two is, like I mentioned, you should know who you get into a relationship with, and if that's your choice.
What do you mean?
What I'm saying is, this whole podcast has been about boundaries.
Okay.
Has been about boundaries and keeping your authenticity and separating yourself and being a whole person and all of that. And when you get into this relationship, going back to the passive and the dominant personality and all of that good stuff, a lot of times that person who is the breadwinner is trying to, because they're the breadwinner, they're using it at almost like a guilt or a justification. I do all the work. I'm the one to go out. I'm the one. You're holding it over that person as if they owe you something. But they don't owe you anything, because you came into the relationship knowing, to some extent or another, what that looks like. And what I mean by some extent or another, this goes back to the intentional dating. And I'm joking, but I'm serious. Did that woman work at McDonald's? Right? If I'm just making some if I'm a 6-figure man and I get a girl because she's cute, but she work at McDonald's, do I actually expect her to match me one day? I don't. Right? So I'm getting into this relationship. So now I can't bring her into this relationship and not hold it above her head that I pay for everything. That's unjust. That's not right. Now, if my value system says so remember how you and I talked about every adult should be able to take care of themselves.
Yes.
That's like rule number one. Every adult should be able to take care of themselves, whatever that means. Now, from there, two people come together.
Not whatever that means, but literally, once you become an adult, you should be able to sustain yourself, your housing, your food, your transportation. You should be able to function in society on your own, independently. Every single adult.
Yes.
Yes.
Two people come together. They make a decision, right? Sometime life happens. I get that. One person gets laid off. But we're going to assume that if you get laid off, you can go find another job. But if you're in a situation where that one person saying, I'm not working, the first question I have is why? Why are you not working? Now, if the reasoning behind not working is kids or family business, things of that sort, you guys have made a decision that, hey, this person is going to stay home. It's better for our situation. It's better for our arrangement that that person stays home. That's a mutual decision, right, that you guys have made together,
Mm-hmm.
it does not change the partnership.
Mm.
It does not change the power or the equality level of the part. This is a mutual decision
Mm-hmm.
that we've come together. The problem is most of us are just not living intentional. We're
Mm-hmm.
just not living intentional, and we find ourselves in these situations where we're taking care of a person that we didn't plan to take care of. We like this person, they cool, and now we're taking care of them. It's like, this is not what I
Mm-hmm.
bargained for. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
sign up for this. And now I got a kid and they not working and they don't have any skill. And now I
Mm-hmm.
have to take care of them. You don't want that situation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And as a man, I understand not having your wife work, but I think it's important that she does something to maintain a skill or a hobby. Because
Mm-hmm.
going back to what we said before, the boundaries thing, what happens a lot of times in these situations, that man is working, he develops a life. That woman is at home,
Mm-hmm.
he is her life.
Right. The
The
children, the
children is her
home.
life. And
Mm-hmm.
she becomes overly needy.
Right.
And that man is annoyed because he like, I just worked all day. And she's just waiting on him to get home.
Right.
And then he gets home and she wants to talk. How much about the day? And he's just like, it's fine, it's work. And you got to do something. You need a
Right.
hobby. Even if you're not working, you should be engaged in something and doing something to um, so that your other boxes are filled. And
Right.
then in general, from an employment perspective, we should have learned, women should have learned, like, you don't want to be, I haven't had a job in 20 years. I have
30
no,
years.
even if you're not, once again, you can be volunteering, you can be picking up one,
Yep.
just find a side part time, just something for you to kind of,
Mm-hmm.
keep a pulse in case the inevitable may happen. 50% of relationships or more in a divorce. You find
Or
yourself in
sick
that,
or
or
lay
sick.
off
Your
or
husband gets sick.
sick and can't
He
work.
can't work.
Right?
So all of these
Mm-hmm.
things are relevant, right? But either way, whatever happens in the relationship, it will always be a partnership.
Mm-hmm. Good answer. Good answer. I think that's the end of that,
And that's the
right?
end. Yeah, I think we wrapped it up.
Okay. Okay.
So
So let's just wrap this up, right?
okay.
How to set healthy boundaries. Essentially, use I statements. We didn't really talk about that, but using I statements instead of blame, right? Regular check ins. We've talked about that. Regular check ins with your partner, the communication. Recognizing when to compromise versus when to stand firm. Essentially, that the point of our podcast here was a healthy relationship is like a dance. Too much space, you drift apart, and too little, you step on each other's toes. So you have to, I think the trick is to finding the rhythm that flows together. So we encourage our listeners, of course, always at the end of our podcast, to share their thoughts on boundaries in relationship. You can enter comments on the video, go to our social media pages, but just share your thoughts about boundaries in relationship and give us some examples of what you think about that.
Okay. And we will see you next time as we tackle another earth-shattering topic about relationships. But for now, thank you for listening to Traditionally Untraditional, and we look forward to talking to you again. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.